I believe each person is drawn to a geography, whether it's a mountain or an ocean or a desert. There lives in nature that which provides one with solace, but also awakens the muse. There also lives in a city, in a skin of glass and steel, with a heartbeat of pistons or a time clock, through arteries of skyways and streets, another living force. A city lives through its people, and its spirit is housed in their stories.
Hi, my name is Kevin Kling and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Proud denizen of the upper Midwest, the North Star State, the nation's icebox.
We're not the East, steeped in history and tradition, or the West, with elbow room and endless possibilities. We are truly the Midwest, the best of both worlds. Well, maybe that's why there's a proverbial sense of the adolescent about Minneapolis. No, I think it has to do with the landscape. I think it has to do with a waterfall. Now, it wasn't the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers or the rich soil that lured people to this area. It was the waterfall, first as a sacred site and later as a source of power for a changing nation. Now, the first people here had a lifestyle that followed the natural course of the seasons and migration of game. Nations like the Dakota and Ojibwe gathered on these banks for hundreds of years. In 1680, Franciscan friar Father Louis Hennepin came up the Mississippi River, both to convert the indigenous people to Christianity, but also in search of a new route to China and Japan. Father Hennepin reported a falls of grand proportion, rivaling Niagara in scope and beauty. Now, lying is a sin, but exaggeration seemed to have been encouraged. After all, funding is funding. Father Hennepin named the falls St. Anthony in honor of the patron saint of travel, oppressed people, and seekers of lost articles. Given that he'd recently suffered a summer with the heat and mosquitoes, a bitter winter held hostage by the Dakota, and the fact there were no Chinese people in sight, one can see why he went with St. Anthony. Father Hennepin then departed to report on the majesty of Iowa. Over 100 years later, Zebulon Pike, of Zebulon Pike fame, arrived here before he peaked in Colorado. Under President Thomas Jefferson, Pike was selected to command an expedition of the new territories acquired in the Louisiana Purchase. Pike saw the opportunity in the lands surrounding the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers and quickly made a treaty with the Dakota. Pike bought this land for a few $100s in trade goods and a pledge that the Dakota could hunt here indefinitely. But later, when white settlers moved in, the Dakota were not allowed to hunt here. Sadly, this was one of many broken promises that opened the upper Mississippi River Valley.
The result was an outpost nestled where the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers meet, called Fort Snelling, built in 1819. So how did Minneapolis become a city? It's a good story. And like all good stories, there are many versions.
One goes like this. In the 1830s, many people tried to acquire St. Anthony Falls. Water meant power. Power to turn wheels, grind grain, and turn saws. Fort Snelling's commander, Joseph Plimpton, tried to grab the land east of the falls. But to his surprise, the post storekeeper, Franklin Steele, had beat him to it. Legend has it that Steele snuck across the river in the night, quickly built a cabin, made breakfast, and offered to share it with Plimpton's men. Steele used his claim to build a sawmill, and the town was called St. Anthony. John H. Stevens built the first house on the West Bank, what would become in time Minneapolis, although it appears he already had neighbors. Soon a thriving town sprung to life. Sawdust, flour dust, the smell of cut pine and milled wheat, of fresh paint and horse manure. Now, what do we name our new city? Charles Holt suggested the semi-indigenous name derived from Minnehaha, falling water, with the Greek affix polis, a city. The name was favorably received, St. Anthony united, the H dropped out, and the town was called Minneapolis. Our country was growing, and the need for lumber great. In harvesting the vast forests of the north, the river was harnessed not only to transport the logs, but also to turn the massive saws. Not everyone was impressed. One eyewitness stated, The spirits and saints have now been driven off, the charm sullied. The entire vicinity is on the verge of becoming a temple to the gods of manufacture and trade. And not all the construction was above ground. A network of canals and tunnels crisscrossed each riverbank. In 1869, one miller even tried to tunnel underneath, but the tunnel suddenly collapsed, nearly destroying the falls. Charging ahead, an apron was built of wood to protect the falls. The papers read, "Minneapolis has spoken. Her motto is Excelsior and her course is onward. The falls will have an apron that will extend from shore to shore, turning the tumbling current into a smooth and gentle flow." Minneapolis was again full speed ahead with milling and logging and textiles, and logging and milling and milling and logging and textiles and milling and logging and milling and milling and milling. In 1878, the Washburn A mill exploded, killing 18 workers. Over 1/3 the Minneapolis milling capacity was destroyed, as well as a lumber yard, a roundhouse, and nearby homes. Minneapolis didn't miss a beat. Washburn saw the opportunity to modernize, and in no time, we boasted the largest flour production in the world. With the new jobs came a labor force, many from Europe, folks leaving hardships or persecution to try their luck in America. But where were they all going to live? Minneapolis had to grow. In the late 1800s, mass transit came by the means of streetcars. And with the advent of the streetcar, neighborhoods began to spring up, first spreading south down Washington Avenue to Cedar Avenue and Riverside or northeast up there by the lumberyard, don't you know? Now where you live depended upon your mode of transportation, ethnicity, and economic status, or dependent upon what part of the hog you ate. South Minneapolis was mostly Scandinavian and German, Northeast Eastern Europeans, and North Minneapolis was predominantly Jewish and African American. There was an area by the river under the Washington Bridge known as Bohemian Flats, mostly populated by lower-income families or recent arrivals from the current newest world. Bohemian Flats lacked conveniences like indoor plumbing. It nonetheless made up for it in rich characters and an active, if not eccentric, street life. Across town there were social clubs, lakes for swimming and boating, sports fields, Lake Harriet Band Pavilion, dance halls, Lake Street bustling with dime stores, bakeries, the Sears Tower, Miller's Ball Field, even Wonderlands. Everywhere, churches and synagogues for worship. Orthodox, Conservative, Catholic, Baptist, Latter-day Saints, Greek Orthodox, Episcopal, Methodist, Lutheran, Lutheran American, Lutheran Finnish, Lutheran Slovak, Lutheran Norwegian, Missouri Lutheran Center, Lutheran Augustana Synod, Lutheran United, and Presbyterian. At night, the smells of food mixed with the lilacs, cabbage and sausage and potatoes, pierogies, dumplings, meatballs, soups and stews, ancestors to the hot dish, turnips, rutabagas, secrets from the homeland, breads and biscuits and krumkaka, strudels, pies, cornbread, beans, chicken, and sauerkraut and sauerkraut and sauerkraut and sauerkraut. At night, the sounds of kids and dogs, kids and families, Red Rover, kick the can, Annie over, dogs and piano lessons in parlors, moms calling for their kids to get home for dinner, and the final call usually containing the child's middle name. Oh, gotta go. Then the kid would yell, "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free," and the night was ended. As always, rich folks could live wherever they wanted, and they chose Fair Oaks, Lowry Hill, and Loring Park. They called their neighborhoods Tangle Towns because the roads tended to curve about, allowing for the most privacy. Beautiful brick and stone homes, complete with stained glass and ornate woodwork, servants' quarters. Oh, the good life, to which I long to become accustomed. At the turn of the 20th century, Minneapolis was a city on the move. The falls were harnessed for hydroelectricity, electric lights, electric streetcars, electric signs, vaudeville and motion pictures. By the roaring 20s, we were in full swing. The jazz age, boom towns, speakeasies and flappers, big bands. The stock market was soaring. The possibilities seemed endless. None exemplified this more than Wilbur Fauché. Wilbur Fauché borrowed $6,000, bought up shares in utilities, amassed $22 million, and built Fauché Tower. 32 floors based on the Washington Monument, it was the tallest building west of the Mississippi. And in August 1929, the tower opened to a 3-day celebration. Even John Philip Sousa wrote a march to commemorate the event. But ask any vaudevillian, the secret is timing. 2 months later, the stock market crashed, Fauché lost everything, and the country plummeted into a Great Depression.
In the wake of the Great Depression, Americans begin to search for an escape where everyday troubles can be dismissed with a song.
We're friends among men, the sky is company. Oh man, depression, you are through, you done us wrong. No.
Much of our work was seasonal, with lumber and agriculture, and the Gateway District, known as a stopover for transient labor, was now attracting an ever-growing population of single, jobless men. Mix in a little alcohol and kaboom! Ooh, that don't look good. As the country suffered, people wondered what had happened to their fair share of the good life. They saw their families go hungry as others seemed to be getting rich. Our unions had been struggling for more than 50 years to establish themselves in the Twin Cities. And in May 1934, truckers from Local 574 went on strike. And the Citizens Alliance, the group that had fought so hard to limit the union, readied for battle. Violence erupted. Clashes involving strikers, police, and the private militia hired by the Alliance resulted in hundreds of injuries and 4 deaths. Finally, martial law was declared. The strike ended in August when employers agreed to recognize the union. Still, these were desperate times. Gangsters ruled the land and the lawless became national heroes. Not to be outdone, we got our own gangster, Isidore Blumenfeld, otherwise known as Kid Can. By the 1920s, Kid Can oversaw activities such as bootlegging, prostitution, and labor racketeering. His run-ins with the newspapers were legendary, resulting in the murder of a reporter, Walter Liggett. But in true Minneapolis fashion, Kid Can reportedly gave back to his North Side community, even sponsoring a ball team. Hey, so what if he made some money betting on his own team? He may have been a thug, but he was our thug. Now, with half of the city out of work, droughts, a looming war in Europe, there was only one thing to do. Have a parade. In 1940, the Aquatennial Parade drew dignitaries and movie stars to our little prairie town. Not long after that, Uncle Sam needed our help fighting overseas. So we sent our very best, Maxine, Patty, and Laverne, the Andrews sisters. By the end of World War II, the nation was turning its attention toward expansion. The city scrapped its streetcars, giving way to highway systems and automobiles. The suburbs offered elbow room and clean living, a good place to raise a family. As people moved from the city to the suburbs, the employers followed. And by the mid-1950s, General Mills abandoned its downtown headquarters and relocated to Golden Valley. No! The Dayton Corporation masterminded the creation of Minnesota's first indoor shopping mall, which opened in 1956. We plan to make our own weather at Southdale, said Donald Dayton. Every day will be fair and mild. Meanwhile, down by the waterfall, the lights were going out. The mills and factories were in decline. As a result, for the first time, the population of Minneapolis began to get smaller. To counteract this, Minneapolis underwent a facelift, and this led to the Great Teardown. The Gateway District was hardest hit. In 5 years, the city removed nearly 200 buildings over 17 square blocks. Thousands of people were displaced, including many retired single men who could not afford to live anywhere else. Perhaps the greatest loss of all was a building known as the Metropolitan. As far as the Metropolitan building is concerned, said the Minneapolis Tribune, the debate is over. For better or for worse, it is destined to become only a memory, cherished by old-timers and perhaps a chapter in some civic history book. 40% of the Gateway project remained undeveloped as late as 1971. Most disturbing was the Metropolitan's footprint, which remained vacant for almost 20 years. But our motto is Excelsior.
and our course is onward.
Fortunately, there were forethinkers on the cultural scene. Tyrone Guthrie saw Minneapolis as the future of the American stage and helped create a theater scene that was rivaled by none.
Dr. Guthrie, we were wondering why you and all these other people thought it so important to have a theater like this.
It's simple. Great plays, the ones we call classics, are really splendidly exciting entertainment when they're well performed, not the desperate bore they seem to be when you have to study them in school. And just as a community needs a public library where great books are available, or an art museum where you can see great pictures, or a symphony orchestra where you can hear great music, so you need a theater where great plays can be brought to life.
In the 60s, the Skyway system was created. A series of overland tunnels kept our people high and dry during the chilling months, turning us into the Venice of the North. The Fauché Tower met its match when the IDS building moved in. You know, some say it was actually the crate the Fauché came in. True.
And this is where I arrived on the scene.
First living in the uptown area, riding the 21A down Lake Street teeming with life, changing from Northern European to African American to Asian, Somalian, Latino. One bus driver saying, "Yeah, there ain't a day that goes by I don't say, shoot, I never seen that before." And downtown was changing too, with glass and steel reflecting our incredibly beautiful sky. The riverfront going from a workhorse to artist lofts to a show place. Dr. Guthrie said one day we would rediscover the river, and you know, we have. When the music scene took off here, I went to my favorites: Husker Du, Gear Daddies, The Wallets, Rue Nouveau, Suburbs, Flaming O's. Waking up the next morning with a blood blister on my thumb from holding my big lighter at the end of the concert. Woo! Woo! I remember walking through the beautiful University of Minnesota campus. Oh, did we come out ahead. Back before Minnesota became a state, St. Paul got the capital, Stillwater got the prison, but Minneapolis got the university. The sports teams moved to downtown thanks to the big marshmallow, the Metrodome. Made out of Tupperware and hot air, you're burped when you exit. The Twins won the World Series in '87, and to show we could do it anytime we wanted, we did it again in '91. I remember the street party afterwards. One cop got in his car, turned to the crowd and said, "Lock it up when you're done," and drove off. Now, we aren't the home of kings and queens, although we could brag a prince. We've had some great politicians. In fact, our most famous citizen never even lived here. But these are my people. I know the language spoken and unspoken. I know that sometimes our emotions can be as bundled up as we are. I know how a snowfall muffles the city in a beautiful quiet, and neighbors are late for work as they help push each other's cars out of the snowbank. And when spring finally arrives and hot dishes turn into salads and exposed flesh turns back into skin, we get downright bacchanalian. The summer rides on my bike down the street, the smells of lilacs, barbecue, and fresh cut lawns.
This is Minneapolis, my home. Uh-oh, gotta go.
Live and direct from the Midwest, for the wilderness of